Okay, good to go. Okay, hello everybody. My name is Roger McKenzie. I'm the acting chair of the National Union of Journalists Black Members Council. Really delighted that you're all able to join us for this year's Claudia Jones lecture. I'll introduce our brilliant guest in a few moments, but what I want to just let you all know right at the beginning is that this webinar is being recorded. So please do take that into account, and we'll record it and it'll be available on the NUJ website, so that people who are not able to join us this evening are able to see this at their leisure. So once again, can I thank you all for joining us for the Claudia Jones lecture. This lecture comes at a really important moment in history, I'd say. Weeks after Donald Trump was re-elected as President of the United States. And as many of you watching this will know, Claudia Jones was um, uh, deported from the United States. And I think it's quite telling that when she was deported, she wasn't deported to her homeland of Trinidad and Tobago. She was deported to London. She was deported to Britain. And we're very delighted that during that time that she was in Britain, that we were able to get the benefit of somebody who I think is one of the great journalists, I think, but also I think one of the great activists of our time, somebody who was able to join together theory and practice, but also write about it in a way that was really accessible to people. What we see with the re-election of Trump is we see many challenges that face the Black community, the African American community in the United States, but also the Black community worldwide. But also, of course, we see the challenges that are faced by working class people, generally by the new Trump administration. What we have the person we have with us today is somebody who I think is going to be able to give us an insight into those challenges, but also in terms of some of the things that we might be able to do to meet those challenges. A journalist in her own right, and I think a really great journalist. Her name is Margaret Kimberley. Margaret is the executive editor and senior columnist of Black Agenda Report, and the current host of Black Agenda Radio podcasts, which is also available online for people to be able to get. So I strongly urge you to subscribe to that and to watch when you can, listen to it when you can. It's a great resource for journalists, great resource for activists. Margaret is also the author of Prejudicial Black America and the Presidents, so really useful for our discussion today. A book that was published in 2020 by Steerforth Press. Margaret's has also briefed the United Nations Security Council earlier on this year as a civil society representative, speaking about the weapons transfers to Ukraine as a threat, and the threat that poses to international peace and security. She's won many awards, including the Serena Shim Award for Uncompromising Integrity in Journalism and the Women's Institute for Freedom of the Press 2021 Women in Media Award. She's also a board member of Consortium News. Margaret's also been around the world as a journalist, as an activist, and we met for the first time earlier on this year on a delegation to China, which was a really life-changing for me moment to be able to see some of the things that we saw and to speak to some of the people that we did. Margaret's an activist, as I said, as well as a journalist. She's an activist in her own right. She's and her activism includes membership of the Administrative Committee of the United National Anti-War Coalition, the Coordinating Committee of the Black Alliance for Peace, and the Board of Directors of the US Peace Memorial Foundation. She's been on loads of news programs, more than you could possibly watch, probably. Al Jazeera, Al Mayadeen, Sky, all of these programs, and so in demand. And we are delighted to be able that you're able to join us, Margaret, to give for us one of the important lectures of the year, one of the important conversations that we're able to have as a National Union of Journalists, but also specifically for the Black Members Council, and that is the talk about as the Claudia Jones lecture. Margaret, over to you, and thanks so much for giving up your time to join us today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Roger, and greetings, and thanks to all of you who have joined us today. And of course, I have to thank my comrade Roger and McKenzie for this invitation, and to the National Union of Journalists Black Members Council. I am truly delighted to be joining you for the 2024 Claudia Jones Memorial Lecture at this very pivotal, dare I say, dangerous moment in history for all people striving and struggling for freedom and struggling for life itself. Our two nations, the UK and the US, love to talk about democracy and freedom. But as the saying goes, they doth protest too much. Because if you look at their actions, you can see that any such concerns are frankly fake. They are used as a ruse to get approval for terrible and inhumane acts and to silence all dissent. I was especially, when I accepted Roger's invitation, I was especially intrigued by the topic. How can the activism of Claudia Jones help us to understand the 2024 United States presidential election? It is an important subject, but we can't allow ourselves to be confused by personalities or allow Donald Trump to be exceptionalized. But more on that later. I'll begin with this reminder that there have always been people who fought for their freedom personally and for the good of humanity and for the good of Black people in particular. Claudia Jones was one such person, and we quite rightly honor and celebrate her all these years after her passing. And I assume that anyone watching knows her life story. Claudia Cumberbatch came to the United States from Trinidad as a child and became a Marxist while still in her youth, and was then deported in the 1950s because she was a Marxist and because she was Black. I want to talk first about law in the United States and how it's often used against Black people and leftists, and woe unto anyone who is Black and a leftist. After World War I, the administration of Woodrow Wilson began severe repression of leftists. The first, and at that moment, the first large-scale wave of Caribbean immigration began at around that time. And the Cumberbatch family were among that group when they arrived in New York in 1924. Now, Wilson, just to explain how US politics works, Woodrow Wilson was a member of the Democratic Party, but let us not be confused. Democrats were the party of the segregated South. Wilson's parents were Northerners who migrated south and became slaveholders. When he was president of Princeton University, one of the most I guess, elite. I don't like that word actually, but anyway, a selective university with rather privileged students for most of its history. But when he was president of Princeton University, he refused to admit Black students, young Black men, the handful who might have been able to attend at that time, but even one was too much. Um, and I'm talking about this to explain how politics works in the United States. He, being a Democrat, um, he did not actively campaign for the Black vote in 1912. At the time, only men could vote. Women couldn't vote until 1920. Black men in the North, though, could vote and were often played an important part in elections in the United States. And when he was running for office for president in 2012, he wrote a Black clergyman. He said, quote, he said he wanted, quote, to assure my colored fellow citizens of my earnest wish to see justice done them in every matter, and not mere grudging justice, but justice executed with liberality and cordial good feeling. Every guarantee of law, every principle of our Constitution commands this, and our sympathies should also make it easy, unquote. Um, uh, there's a man, William Monroe Trotter, a Black activist, a journalist, a very important person in our history. And he and a group of Black men met with candidate Wilson. And he said it was a great meeting. He said, at that time, we were received open-handed, we Afro-Americans, over the heads of a score of non-African-Americans, non-Afro-Americans who were waiting in the anteroom. The government had us draw our chairs right up around him and shook hands with great cordiality. When we left, he gave me a long hand clasp and used such a pleased tone that I was walking on air. What a change between then and now, unquote. As Trotter pointed out, Wilson's presidency was quite another matter. The 19-year-long U.S. invasion and occupation of Haiti began under his administration. He immediately segregated the federal workforce in Washington, D.C., and his Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Franklin D. Roosevelt, yes, that Franklin D. Roosevelt, wrote the order to segregate restrooms. After 1918, after the end of the war, there was a wave of repression, the first Red Scare, that began under the guise of fighting communism and anarchism. The Palmer raids, named after the Attorney General, the person in charge of justice in the United States, Attorney General Mitchell Palmer, took place in 1919 and 1920 and resulted in arrests and deportations around the country. This was the first Red Scare, and remembering the word red, there was also a wave of racist violence in 1919 called Red Summer. Black people were attacked by mobs in cities in the South, the North, the Midwest, killed in their hundreds in every part of the country. And these racist attacks took place generally without any sort of legal consequence for the perpetrators. So this is the context for Claudia Jones' work as a revolutionary and as a journalist. We have a saying that journalism should afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. But that work has always been under attack. And when people like Jones are both journalists and leftists, they're always targeted. Of course, she became a target beginning in the 1940s. She was truthful about her membership in the Young Communist League and was denied citizenship as a result. The Smith Act, which was known as the Alien Registration Act, more popularly known as the Smith Act, made it illegal to advocate for the violent overthrow of the United States government. And anyone who was a communist was automatically assumed to support the violent overthrow of the government. Beginning in 1942, she was under investigation by the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which recommended her deportation at that time. And as we know, she eventually was deported in 1955, but not to her Caribbean homeland, but to London, England. The colonial governor of Trinidad said she may prove troublesome. I suppose that was probably true, but also is a badge of honor for Jones. But, now we look at US citizenship as a new and also former president prepares to take office on January 20th, 2025. Donald Trump has run for president 3 times and won twice, in large part because of his hostility to immigrants, bragging during his first campaign that he would build a wall on the border with Mexico and make Mexico pay for it. While president, excuse me, in his first term, he met with senators, a group of senators about immigration issues, and he referred to shithole countries in Africa and Haiti and pondered how the US might increase immigration from countries like Norway. That always amused me because unlike the US, Norway has free healthcare and university education. Going to the US would be a step down for any Norwegian, but logic was not the issue, racism was. And now Trump is back in office and pledging to have mass deportations of undocumented people. There are estimates that there are more than 11 million undocumented people in the United States. In addition, Haitians and people from El Salvador and other Central American countries are among those with something called temporary protective status. Trump was referring to them in his shithole countries rant, and he attempted to end TPS during his first term in office, but he was thwarted by court decisions. No doubt he'll try again. And the thousands of people admitted as asylum seekers, excuse me, are also at risk. But I caution us all to remember something very important. As we pointed out at the Black Alliance for Peace in a statement entitled "The Face of the White People's House May Have Changed, but the War on the Oppressed Working Class Hasn't," we said, quote, "Focusing attention on the Trumpian wing of the capitalist class as the primary or principal contradiction facing the people in the United States or in the world obscures the reality that the dominant wing of capital, finance capital, along with the US-based transnational corporations, have captured and are operating through both parties. However, it's the Democratic Party wing of the dictatorship of capital that has championed what is popularly referred to as neoliberalism," unquote. It's Bill Clinton, a Democrat. Now, in the 60s, there was a switch in the parties, and beginning in the late 60s, the Democrats became the party thought of as more liberal, the quote unquote Black People's Party. Most white people in presidential elections will vote for Republicans being the party of Abraham Lincoln, which, had the loyalty of Black people for many decades. But it's supposed to be the Democrats who are the quote unquote good progressive party. But it's Bill Clinton who ended regulation of the financial services industry, ending legislation that went back to the days of Franklin Roosevelt, which created the bubble which burst in 2008, the stock market crash, the crash that was felt all over the world, the housing bubble that existed not just in the US, but in countries around the world. That was all the work of Bill Clinton. And we have to talk about his, the successive administrations. Obama bailed out the banks. He became president immediately after that economic crisis that I referred to. bailing out the banks in trillions of dollars, but not bailing out the people. And Black people, especially, the little bit of wealth that we have is tied up in home ownership. Black people lost their homes in the thousands without any effort at assistance from Obama. We've been talking about deportations, Claudia Jones' deportation, and that of other people. It's true that in his first, well, up to now, only term in office, Donald Trump deported 1.5 million people. However, in his first term, Barack Obama deported 2.9 million, and that's still a record. And in the second term, 1.9 million. So in both of his terms, Obama deported more people than Donald Trump did. We're talking about journalism. One of the remnants of that Red Scare, the Palmer raids, was the Espionage Act. And it was used very sparingly, though, in ensuing decades. But the person who brought it back into use was Barack Obama, using it against journalists, using it against anyone who leaked information the government said was confidential or a state secret. So we have to be careful, even as we look at Donald Trump not being a friend of the people. We have to remember that in these bourgeois parties, they're more alike than they are different. And Claudia Jones, as a Marxist, understood that these changes in bourgeois elections didn't necessarily mean there were changes for the better for Black people. As I said before, anti-Black politics inevitably is anti-left politics. I will tell you a little about the early 1950s during the Red Scare. Paul Robeson, a man named William Patterson, and others, 1951, just a few years after the United Nations ratified the Convention on Genocide, Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, I believe is the full name. And they wrote a document, We Charge Genocide, saying that the treatment of Black people in the US was by definition a genocide. And I remind people, and I urge people to look this up for themselves. You know, this convention is very simple. It's not legalese. It's not very complicated. Genocide is defined as an intent to harm a group of people, a racial, ethnic, or religious group. And it's Black people who were in the forefront. And of course, when the hammer fell, it fell on people like Paul Robeson, like W.E.B. Du Bois, like Claudia Jones. So we always have to ask about politics, about these bourgeois elections, what they do mean, what they don't mean. Donald Trump is a unique figure politically, someone who was known as a personality, as a businessman who actually was a failed businessman. I don't know if this is known outside the U.S. His real estate companies and his casinos did very poorly. He filed bankruptcy 5 or 6 times. I'm not sure if it's 5 or 6. I know it's at least 5 times. But he promoted himself. He was a promoter, always in the media. He hosted a reality show called The Apprentice, which I believe more than anything put him in the White House. That and his very open racism about Mexican immigrants and other immigrants tapping in to the worst impulses of racist white people in particular. However, because of the failures, the neoliberal failures of the Democratic Party, he has begun to gain votes outside of that group with the the number of, for example, Latino voters still giving most of their votes to the Democrats, but the number dropping every election. And now the Democrats won a tiny majority, I believe 52% of the Latino vote. Black people, traditionally 90% vote for the Democrat. For Black men, it's dropped. It was down to 78%, not a huge number, but enough to put him over the top and back in the in the White House. So, what's the role of a journalist? As I am proud to call myself. Um, we have, as I pointed out, presidents using the Espionage Act. That's how Julian Assange was kept locked up in England. The United States charged him with the Espionage Act offenses. Almost all the charges were phony, by the way. But at any rate, he and quite rightly pleaded guilty in exchange for his freedom. No one holds that against him. But he was not alone, and he won't be the last. You know, I think it's important to remember that Claudia Jones, even after she was deported and, you know, one would think defeated, she continued her work as a journalist in I believe it's the West Indian Gazette, and continued her advocacy. And so I think it's important for Black people to remember one lesson of her life was that she did not give up. She did not succumb despite all of the repression that she experienced, that other Black people experienced. And so we have to ask ourselves, what did these elections mean? And we can ask that about your country as well. This week I interviewed, and it will be up tomorrow. I interviewed Richard Medhurst for the second time, as you know, independent journalist based in England, who was arrested under your Terrorism Act. I shouldn't say your, I shouldn't do that to you. The Terrorism Act, charged with giving support to a proscribed organization, although when asked, well, what did I do? He gets no answer. And the media in I mean, here in the US, the corporate media hasn't given him any attention either, but a British journalist arrested in Britain, he was actually detained for a day, I believe, and major outlets don't mention it at all. And, you know, it's assumed that there is a D notice, a request by the government for the media not to report on certain people who can't even say that they got a D notice. So I thought it was important to bring that up as well in these allegedly free and democratic countries. We have a very specific threat now. There's legislation in Congress, we use the term lame duck Congress, which will end on January 1st, to remove nonprofit status from any organization that is deemed to be in support of terrorism. Well, what is terrorism? We don't have a list of proscribed organizations, but the Secretary of the Treasury, whoever Trump nominates, should this become law, and there are some Democrats who voted for this as well, by the way, if any organization is deemed to be in support of terrorism, they can lose their nonprofit status, their ability to raise money, their ability to access banks. And that is the end result. It seems to be cyclical to me. The Red Scares of the 20s, the Red Scares of the 50s. Now it's not a Red Scare anymore. It's a scare of loss of control of the state. We have sites like Consortium News, of which I'm on the board, great publication, online publication, which had been, in recent months, it had been hacked. Someone actually stole the website, which was restored. It's been on lists as one of those lists that claims it's, supports Russia, or, Russia it's still the boogeyman. It used to be under the Soviet Union, it was the boogeyman because of communism. It isn't anymore. It's just the country that stands in the way of US hegemony. So those are the threats to the would-be Claudia Joneses of our day, to those of us who believe in being truth tellers. And I think this is especially interesting time because with social media, we all have the potential to be journalists, which is why independent media is so often under attack. So I'll wind up by saying we should all try to be like Claudia Jones. I haven't been imprisoned. I haven't been deported. The least I can do is continue to tell the truth. And part of that truth is that people who seek justice for humanity will always be under attack. If it's Donald Trump is in office, if Joe Biden is in office, if Barack Obama is in office. So we must be truthful about the nature of bourgeois elections. So I will wrap up. I think I went over a little bit. I will wrap up there, and I look forward to interacting with any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Margaret. Really illuminating, loads for us to talk about. And one of the things that that I always I'm always reminded of whenever we have these sorts of sessions is how much we can learn from history, and the parallels that can be drawn about things that are taking place in the United States and things that are taking place in Britain. For example, 1919, Red Summer of 1919 in the US was also Red Summer of 1919 in Britain too. So Black people in Britain in 1919, so obviously just after the First World War, under attack in cities across the length and breadth of Britain, right from London right up to Glasgow, in Scotland. So and these were Black people being attacked in their own homes, for the usual kind of tropes that we hear about, taking our jobs, and all of this sort of stuff. So very kind of interesting way that the division is still apparent about the way that they try and divide us as Black and white people from each other and set one against another. I suppose for my first question, mainly because it's the first thing that's occurred to me, is you mentioned Julian Assange, and he gets talked about a lot, but I suppose one journalist that doesn't get talked about as much these days, and I think probably should be talked about, is Mumia Abu-Jamal. So I wonder, could you tell us where we are at the moment? I should have given you some warning about this, maybe, but
Well, that's
for me,
okay.
but for me, Mumia is one of the great journalists, and I don't think he gets talked about enough. So maybe you could give us an update.
No. Well, Mumia Abu-Jamal is one of many political prisoners in the United States. The United States has more people incarcerated than any nation on earth, and has political prisoners that are kept incarcerated for decades. Mumia for 50 years. He was accused, convicted of killing a police officer in Philadelphia. He's always maintained his innocence. Every effort that he and his attorneys have used has been thwarted. Last year, his appeal was denied on the basis of evidence having been withheld from the jury. But even behind bars, he's been an amazing journalist. I urge people to look to Prison Radio. You can see his writings, you can hear him speak. An amazing voice, and I think, and thank you for bringing him up. excuse me, political prisoners in the US are kept until they're very old. You know, the having accused him, having been convicted of killing a police officer, he was on death row. He was, uh, you know, the sentence was changed to life imprisonment rather than the possibility of being executed. But that's the kind of uh, charge that is made against political prisoners in order to keep them from ever being free. And there are other people who have been freed only when they're at the point of death. So I think it's very important that you brought him up about his great journalism and about the plight of political prisoners in the U.S.
I should thanks, Margaret. I should say as well to everybody watching this that if you do want to put a question to Margaret, the only way of doing that is if you can put that in the chat. I'll try my best to pick that up as we go along. But I'm too excited chatting with Margaret, to be honest. But I'll try and pick that up as we go along. But please do put your questions in the chat as well. One of the other things, I guess, Margaret, that I'm interested in is this whole thing about the independent media and how that develops. Obviously, I work. Well, it's not obvious, but I do. I'm international editor for the Morning Star newspaper, and we see ourselves obviously as independent. The world's only English language socialist daily newspaper, 6 days a week and so on, but certainly not part of the mainstream press. Well, what is the state? I mean, we've got your station, we've got, you know, we've got other stations that some of whom even purport to be on the left. I mean, what do you think is the state of independent media in the United States? Because I think that one of the things that strikes me is that a lot of the things that you talked about are certainly not going to be talked about on mainstream media. It's certainly not from our perspective, but but independent media, at least we have a chance. So what is the state of independent media?
Well, we have excellent independent media in the US. Our site, blackagendareport.com. I mentioned Consortium News and many others. So there's very high quality journalism on many different sites. The problem is that we are ignored. We have I'll give you an example. 2 years ago, the Nord Stream pipeline exploded mysteriously, connecting gas from Russia to Europe. Who could have done it? Now, everybody who had any common sense said, well, the US did it, obviously. So Seymour, a few months, 6 or 7 months later, Seymour Hersh, who worked in corporate media for many years, who was a New York Times reporter, who received a Pulitzer Prize, all of these accolades that generally get someone gravitas. And on his Substack, he provided excellent evidence that, in fact, Joe Biden's administration had blown up the Nord Stream pipeline. What do the New York Times and the Washington Post and the TV networks do? They ignored it. They just never reported on it. Never. I mean, what should have been a huge story, and which at certain points in history might have actually been a story that made it into mainstream corporate media, was just disappeared. Just don't mention it. And so that is an example, is the one that first came to mind of this very good journalism that's going on independently on Substack or Patreon or certain websites that those of us in this group are aware of, but they just don't cover it at all. So our problem still is exposure. And then, of course, sometimes when sites do succeed, a lot of these platforms will allow access, and then all of a sudden they'll change. There's a great site called African Stream. A couple of months ago, the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, sanctioned RT, sanctioned Sputnik, The little bit of airtime they got in the US disappeared. People were threatened with the Foreign Agency Registration Act. And he suddenly said that African Stream was linked to RT. It isn't. Was linked to the Russian government. It isn't. And suddenly YouTube took off, removed African Stream from their platform. Meta, Facebook, Instagram, etc., removed African Stream. So far, X, had kept them on. It's the only large platform where they're still allowed to exist, where this free country where we have these separations and the state can't tell you what to do. Well, the Secretary of State said African Stream was a Russian organization, and then overnight they public lost access to them. And then later, Google, YouTube is Google, confiscated their emails. Their Gmail accounts are gone. So that's the plight of independent media, great work being done, but the better the work is, the higher your profile, the greater danger of either being ignored or being under attack.
I was just thinking that the point you made about exposure, we can have all the brilliant writing that we like, that if can't get it into people's, in front of people, into their hands, onto their machines or whatever, and so people can read or listen or watch what we do as journalists, then it's really not going to change anything. As you say, one of our aims is to try and engage people to activity, really. And I was thinking that maybe this was certainly one of the issues that was faced by the West Indian Gazette all those years ago. I mean, really quality writing in that publication. I mean, really good stuff. But getting it into the hands of people, because you didn't have the distribution, certainly didn't have anything like an internet or anything to be able to do it, was really difficult. But even now, when we have the internet to be able to get stuff out, highly controlled, real barriers put in the way, and if you go too far, they'll take you down. And it's just one of the things that came to my mind when you were speaking. The other thing, I guess, is the I mean, you and I can't have a conversation about independent media without talking about the great Glenn Ford, really. Maybe you can tell us. For me, one of my real heroes in journalism. Can you tell us a little bit about Glenn, and also how that led you into becoming a journalist as well?
Sure. The late Glenn Ford, may he rest in peace. Glenn was my mentor and comrade. We co-founded Black Agenda Report. It's a bit sad. Two other co-founders have passed, Glenn and Bruce Dixon. We started out with the site called Black Commentator, and about 20 years, I can't believe it's 20 years ago now. At the time, everyone was blogging, that was the thing. And I had a little blog, and I wanted to start writing, and I wrote a letter. They had letters to the editor and Black Commentator, and I wrote one, and Glenn said, "Oh, that was very good." And he told me he was going to print it. And I said, "Can I write something else?" And he said, "Yes." Now, I didn't go to journalism school. I never made a living as a journalist. But Glenn, it's a very important thing, he was always encouraging. He encouraged me and other people to get started. So I started writing for Black Commentator for a variety of reasons. We wanted to start our own site, Black Agenda Report, in 2006. Glenn was he had an interesting life story. He grew up mostly in Jersey City, New Jersey, just outside of New York. But he was a red diaper baby who spent part of his childhood also in Georgia, in the segregated South.
Red diaper, what's that?
Oh, red diaper baby. Sorry, his mother was a socialist. That means born a socialist. So that was Glenn. He came of age. He was in the military during the Vietnam era. He was a Black Panther as a young man. His father was a a DJ in Georgia, was the first Black person to have a dance show on Georgia television, something like that. Glenn was on the radio as a kid. His father put him on the air when he was still like 9 or 10 years old. So he was a journalist from his youth, a socialist from his birth, and came of age at a pivotal moment. And all of that. He compiled, before he passed, he completed the manuscript for his book, The Black Agenda, published by Or Books. I encourage everybody to read that. So he was an amazing man. He passed away in 2021. And I and others took up the mantle to continue Black. Aha! You know, it's so funny. I was looking around and was like, where do I have it? Thank you. Thank you so much.
Excellent book. I highly recommend it. It's really, really good.
Thank you. But and of course you can still, you know, we still have all his articles up. Black Agenda Radio, he began, obviously. So he's missed politically, journalistically, personally by myself and others, but his legacy will definitely live on. And since we're showing books, I'll show you my book, Prejudential. Oh no, it's not mirrored. Prejudential.
That's it. Got it. Yeah, yeah.
Prejudential
Yeah, got it.
is okay. The title was the publisher's idea, Prejudice and Prejudential. Prejudential, Black America and the Presidents. And you can buy it online. You can buy it from Steerforth Press is the publisher. So obviously, I think it's a very good book. I just put in the chat an article we had about Claudia Jones in one of our, we have the Black Agenda Review, our editors, Jemima Pierre and Peter Hudson. They provide great history. And this is the essay, American Imperialists and the British Imperialism and the British West Indies, which was written by Claudia Jones in 1958. So I put that in the chat. That's an example of our coverage of Claudia Jones's work, and yet another reason to be a reader of blackagendareport.com.
I mean, do you find that one of the, I'm thinking about some of the challenges that face us as Black journalists, and in fact as activists who are Black, is that there's still too many people who think that that's all we're bothered about, and that's all we should write about, or that we can write about. Do you see that in the States as well?
Yes, you can only write about Black people. Yes, you can only write about, maybe you can internationally, you can write about Africa or the Caribbean, but not about anything else. And yes, that is a struggle. And I've had to remind, you know, I'm partly grateful if I'm asked to be on a panel to talk about some Black nation or topic or person. But yeah, we have to just remind people, I can talk about other stuff here. And I think it's important too when that way to take those opportunities when we have them. But that'll always be a problem. You know, as Black people, we're just not taken as seriously in any number of ways. And that is one such example. But I think we have to, you know, barge our way in as often as we can and take these opportunities. Black Agenda Report, we write about everything, you know, news from a Black left perspective, yes, but Glenn wrote an excellent piece about Ukraine in 2014 after the Maidan coup, for example. So it's an example of Black people who are knowledgeable about a wide range of topics. And that's what makes it such a great resource.
I mean, I think one of the things that, I mean, when that happens to me, one of the ways that I approach this is that I'm always looking to establish the links across. So if I'm talking, you know, if I'm talking about an issue of race equality, you know, racism or whatever, there is a link across to the rest of the working class, and I think that's an important role that we can play, because apart from anything else, one of the roles that One of the things that often doesn't happen from some white journalists is that they don't talk about the links to race. They don't talk about the links to Black people. So if we can play that role, maybe it's a reminder to other journalists to widen their scope in the way that they look at the challenges that we're faced with.
Yeah, to widen their scope, to let us in, to give us those opportunities. So that they aren't, it's often happened to me. I'm assuming it's happened to you too. Someone has a podcast and suddenly they want to cover Haiti, or suddenly they want to cover Congo, and they don't know anything about it. So they'll ask me, who should I invite? Who would be good to have on? And I'm, always happy to give out those references. But that speaks to a bigger problem, that people who can be very well informed about Ukraine or about Syria don't know anything about Congo, or don't know anything about Haiti, or call themselves anti-imperialists, but think that another occupation of Haiti would be a good thing. So our work is much needed. And I think it's also important just to ask people, listen, you haven't covered this issue or that issue. When are you going to? And this is who I think you can reach out to. But yeah, it's a very big problem. And
Yeah.
I think it's part of the way Black people are seen and are treated.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking of so there's understandably lots of discussion about Ukraine, the importance of that geopolitically. Understandably, lots of discussion about the issues taking place in the Middle East, stroke West Asia, all of that, lots of discussion. But one of the big humanitarian crises on the planet at the moment is in Sudan, and it rarely gets talked about. So if we're able to as journalists we want to write about Sudan because it's important and we see it, and our kind of ancestors are from the continent and so on. We want to write about that stuff, but we can also draw the parallels about why that is happening, who is funding it, where the weapons are coming from, why there's a lack of intervention, and who should be making that intervention to stop the fight in any way. I mean, because we bring that view that's maybe a little bit different. And for me, that was one of the great things about the way that Claudia wrote about international issues. She didn't just write about what was happening in Britain. She was a window to the mother continent as well. She was a window to the United States and the Caribbean, that in a way that nothing else happening nobody else at the time was writing in the same sort of way. And I think one of the great lessons that I get from her is that we can perform that role now. As you're saying earlier on, how can we learn from Claudia? I think that was one of the things that we could learn.
Oh, absolutely. The Sudan, it's interesting how the US has its fingers in everything happening. Just name any African country, the US destabilizing country, picking leaders, and Africa is not covered. It's just this continent that's a big mess, and they have these strongman dictators. Well, hello, where do they come from? If leaders emerge who in any way thwart the US or thwart NATO, then suddenly they're couped, they disappear, they're assassinated. So it's important, yes, to, when we talk about US interventions around the world, you can't miss Africa. Sudan has been, Bill Clinton, one of the most disgraceful things he did was to bomb a chemical plant, a pharmaceutical plant. I think they made aspirin or something, because allegedly it was what did they say? It was chemical weapons. I can't remember what it was, but it was a horrible thing. He was trying to distract people from his own scandal at the time. And that's what Sudan has been subjected to. The country split in two, in part due to US interference. A former president, the ICC, very problematic International Criminal Court, demanding that he be arrested. When only Africans are tried at the ICC. There were a handful of Serbs and everybody else African. Why is that? Why can't Bill Clinton or Tony Blair or George W. Bush or Barack Obama be tried at the ICC? Why is it just Africans who've fallen out of favor with former patrons? So yeah, that's all very important. And you're right, Sudan and Congo, there are millions of people displaced, homeless, killed, and receiving no attention or misinformation about, or even when they give attention, it's not media here will write about the Congo. Oh, it's so terrible, all these people killed. Well, they don't tell you that the US backs Uganda and Rwanda, and they regularly pillage Congo. They don't tell you about the US role. They don't tell you about these vassal states which help the US. So that's just one of the ways in which our work is so valuable.
I mean, I guess for the kind of final question as we move towards a conclusion now is I always like to think about, well, where are the chinks of light for us? Where are the hope? Where can we find hope as both Black journalists and but also as activists, which is what we are? I mean, where are those chinks of light, Margaret, do you think?
Oh, I think, and this is a difficult time to think about any little bit of light, with so many very dangerous things happening in the world. But I think it's important for us, and we met in China, as you said, a delegation of Friends of Socialist China delegation. I would say that it's very important to go to a country you're told not to like. Go to China, go to Venezuela, go to Nicaragua, go someplace where you're told not to like it. Because part of our problem is being in this bubble in the West of even with our political orientation, we're impacted by that exclusion of the rest of the world. So I would say that's where the light is. The light is outside of our countries. We're told they'll say Putin is isolated or Xi Jinping is somebody that they don't want us to like is isolated. Well, this isolation is most of humanity. Nobody's isolating Putin except the US and Europe and Canada. Nobody else is. People in the rest of the world don't have those opinions at all. So I would say the light is elsewhere. It's in many other places. We need those reminders that there are revolutionary governments. There are those examples, excuse me, exist everywhere, exist elsewhere. And we have to give them our attention, excuse me, give them our attention and seek them out for ourselves. Because sometimes despite our best efforts, we get sucked into this, collective West is the world, if we're not careful about that. So it can be giving exposure to those issues. It can be seeing those places for ourselves, helping other people see them. I think that's where the light is reminding ourselves that this little bubble that we're told is the whole world just is not. And to always tell the truth. I think, sometimes I wonder, is anybody, I'm struggling to write something. I'm like, who's reading this? How many people actually read? And then so I'll get an email from someone who tells me that's really great, or I love what you do. There's always some light. There are people who we don't know their names, and they are depending on us and look to us. So there's lots of light.
Yeah, I believe there is a lot of lights as well. I'm kind of reminded of something the great Walter Rodney once said, and that is always be really clear about who you're writing for. And for me, that is really, really important. So I sit down every day just to think, when I'm sitting down to write a story, who am I writing this for? Who's going to be reading this? And for me, that is really important, not to pander to anybody, but to be, as you say, to tell the truth, to be a truth teller in the best way, in the best language that I can possibly do. Margaret, can I thank you so much for giving up? I know how busy you are and all the work that you do as a journalist, but also across the progressive movements as well. Just thank you so much. I honestly say, and it was one of the great moments for me this year, being able to meet you of all places, not even in the United States, but in like
I know.
it's great.
In Beijing.
But
I know. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And you know, if there's anybody I was going to give time to, it would be you. I loved giving this talk. I hope it was helpful to folks. And thank you so much, Roger. And I know we're at the end of the year. Happy New Year! If I don't talk to you before January.
And the same to you too. But can I just remains for me to thank everybody for tuning in to this webinar, and for all of those who hopefully going to be watching this later on the NUJ website. If you are a Black member of the NUJ and you're not involved in the Black Members Council, please do get involved. We need to raise the voices of Black journalists within the National Union of Journalists and everywhere that we are. And we need to be making sure that our profession is really clear about the contribution that has already been made by Black journalists and the contribution that will be made by Black journalists now and going forward into the future. So can I thank you all. Thanks for everyone who's helped us to do this webinar, and peace and love to everybody. Thank you, Margaret. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.